The future of talk is here. Power 102 Digital.
Yes, indeed, it is right here at Power 102 Digital Wednesday. Hard Talk starts now with host Fareed Ali. Good afternoon, Fareed.
Good afternoon, David. It's good to hear your voice. How's everything going? All is well?
Everything's nice and normal.
We've been having for the listening public, we've been having these discussions with various doctors, discussing the issue of what we may call on the street sugar or diabetes, as is more customarily said. But David, I mean, you've been sitting in. How has this impacted on your mind? I could say that suddenly I'm counting calories and counting sugars.
Well, thank God that I don't have that problem. From a very early age, I had liked a lot of sweet stuff and salty stuff, back in those days with chows and sweet mango and all these kind of things. But as I grew older, I became more slanted towards the vegetarian style of living. I'm not a vegetarian. I eat meat. I eat chicken. Yeah. Um, I try to keep away from red meats and stuff. So where diabetes or my sugar levels are concerned, I think that is in a good place. I don't have a problem with that because I've been taking my annual checkups. As a matter of fact, I have one due very soon. And where hypertension is concerned, I don't have those kind of problems. And I guess it's the way I eat. I eat kind of funny. There are certain things I would not indulge in. There are certain things I would have no cravings for. Cravings can make you indulge. But that doesn't say that there are times I don't eat junk. One time I'd love doubles like man. I couldn't see a doubles cut and pass it straight at all. I had special double vendors. I had special roti places. I like that because once the surroundings look hygienic, you'll catch me indulging and stuff. But where that is concerned, I think I take good care of that. I hope that when I do get my next checkup, it will read in the same good favor as I wanted to read, where my sugar intake and levels are concerned, as well as high blood pressure, because the way things are now, especially when you're shopping for food to eat, even vegetables, you have to be very particular about vegetables now because a lot of the food, the especially the green leafy vegetables, like lettuce and pak choy, and it has now gone into like celery and chive and what we call shadow benny or bandania. They're growing these plants now via this aquaponics kind of system, this hydroponics and stuff, where it's like a water soil, if I should say that for people to understand, and they feed the plants with these chemicals. So, from a scientific point of view, I don't know. I have biology, but I am not too sure as to what's the difference between plants growing in soil as to be uh, in comparison with plants that are, grown
Right.
in a watery base. So I don't know about the levels of chemical intake and stuff. I have no idea about that. But lately, I'm taking it into consideration as, these people are planting like this. I mean, a lot of people are successful in that kind of hydroponics. They supply supermarkets and all of that. But the question is the measured input of the chemicals that the plants are using to grow, um, is it a measured, standardized kind of thing? That from that angle, it bothers me. But I lean more to vegetables, and I eat vegetables raw, partner. I eat a lot of vegetables raw. So I think it's the safest way where your food intake is concerned. And but I cannot vouch for everybody. Everybody have their craving. Everybody have a liking for something. People like flavor and taste.
Right.
I too like flavor and taste. But when it comes to my everyday diet, I try to keep it that kind of way. So when I go to for medical checkups. I know I've never had any problems with sugar levels too high or too low, or hypertension and stuff. And they both go hand in hand. Diabetes and high blood pressure, they go hand in hand. If you have the both, you're in real trouble. And one leads to the other. Like I've been asking the guests that you had earlier on, all of them talk about diabetes being the spawning ground for a lot of um, medical issues and conditions that can develop. So I try to battle along those lines. I try to encourage people to eat that kind of way, but that is very difficult to do, to encourage somebody to eat a particular way. There are some people who will take it seriously and try their best. There are some people who will do that after some sort of condition has been diagnosed or something like that.
What we could do is perhaps ask the geneticist that is on the first hour that question that you ask in relation to when it's vegetables and so on that is grown using that hydroponic or any other process, meaning it's not placed in the soil and drawing nutrients from the soil, whether that chemical can be a source of problem. That's an interesting point, because I mean, if it is you're not drawing, if the plant is not drawing nutrients from the soil, and let me put it this way, it doesn't have the discretion to draw and process what is drawing from the soil, then when you artificially, if you have a plant on drips, if I may put it that way, you're injecting into the plant what you want, then you have the you need to be careful. The individual needs to be careful as to what they're feeding this plant, because whatever you're feeding the plant, you're ultimately feeding yourself.
Yeah, that's right, and it's based on the amounts, because I mean, scientifically, some people might have gone through the processes and the experiments that will say, okay, a lettuce or pak choy will need so and so amount of chemicals that they draw from the earth, but the roots of the plant in the soil, to me, this is my opinion, they will draw what they desire, or what is available in the soil content to produce the food. And they probably sat down and did the experiments, like I said, and come up with, okay, this plant needs this kind of chemical, this amount. But the thing is, from a hydroponic point of view, anybody who decides, well, listen, I am not going to do anything negative. I'm going to look for my own dollar. I'm going to get some PVC pipes. I'm going to get the tank. I'm going to get all the apparatus and set up this hydroponic sort of plant, vegetable production. But the people who will advise them to do so, or they might just read up about it, might say, okay, it takes, in this tank of water, you put in 2 teaspoons. Let me try to be real layman, like you put 2 teaspoons of this chemical, or you put 2 teaspoons of that chemical. Who knows if that is the amount the plant needs, or if that is the amount that you should be circulating, because this hydroponic thing is a recycling of the water that has the chemical contents that feed the plant. It's a recycling of that keeps going on and on and on until you reap. Yeah, another type where they have this sort of they have this soil that they buy. It's a sort of compacted kind. I think it's made out of the fibers of coconut, dry coconuts. They take the fibers out and they process it and compress it. And when you buy it, you break it up, you put it in the PVC pipes, but yet still from the tanks that has the chemical mixture, at intervals, the pump will go off and pump this water into the soil. So it's not like a recycling as with some other plants. So what I'm concerned about there is the quantity of the chemicals that are being added to this water supply. And there are some people, people like things to happen quick. So if you put an extra teaspoon, and that's using teaspoon as a measurement, right? If you put an extra teaspoon, it might go faster. It might get bigger. So people who are bent on the money-making part of the business will I'm not saying they will, but it probably happens where people do that, and the plant will be overfed, even though it's looking nice and rosy and thing. Because if you look at organic food production, I prefer organic food production where that concern is where that is a concern to me, because organically this plant is just growing off of stuff, manure, water and so on. But supply and demand can cause people who are planting on big scales to use chemicals, because you have to protect against pests and all these kind of things, and get the plant, in a sort of a condition that it's worthy to put on sale. So, but organic food it's obvious the best way to eat, but who knows what this organic food may contain. I see your guest is here with us now, Farid.
Dr. Mann.
Farid Ali, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Dr. Mann.
I'm glad to hear
Mann,
that.
it's great
I'm
making...
trying to center my diplomas. It's heck. I'm not very good at interior design. Farid, it's such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, same here. Let me ask you this while you're on air. We were arranging to have you on from 5 p.m. until 6, and I asked of the possibility of whether you would be available from as early as 4:15, and you're here at 4:30. So it means it's great we have you earlier than normal. But if I were to ask you, what is happening is simply this. We had an initial guess of a geneticist that was preceding you, and she is running a few minutes late. So we have a bit of a miscommunication, if I may put it that way. Is it possible for you to rejoin us at 5, if that is possible?
Yeah, I'm just testing everything. I've had some technical problems before. I expected to be on at 5.
Okay, great. But seeing that you're here, maybe we can ask you a few questions in the interim. But when our guest comes on at who's supposed to precede you, we will continue with her, and then you can rejoin us at 5. Is that possible?
Yeah, so we'll do as much as we can before 5. And then you'll have your other guest on, and then we'll finish the interview after her.
Great.
Is that what you'd like, Farid?
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Okay. That sounds great. Let me ask you a question, Farid. If when I do this, and I'm reading something off of my screen, can you still see me? Are you aware that I'm reading something off of a screen?
I'm still seeing you and I'm hearing you.
Oh, wonderful. So I have some notes on the screen I'd like to use, and I can just go ahead and move them by. And it's invisible to you, correct?
It's invisible to you, yes.
Wonderful, Farid. I'm ready whenever you are, sir.
Right. So my guest in the background, the individual you're not seeing, but you may hear from at times, it's or if I may put it this way, it's a keyboard operator, but he's a lot more important to me than that. We share the interview from time to time. So if he interrupts and asks a question, you'll be getting a question from somebody you're not seeing, but it's fine. It's all good.
So I would be getting a question from a disembodied voice. Is that correct?
Yes. But
yes, I'm just the technical operator behind the scenes in the studio.
I don't know. You sound like a disembodied voice to me.
Farid, your guest is here, Dr.
Dr. Mann.
Yes.
Dr. Ramlachan is with us, the guest that preceded you. So it seems that she has...
It's a pleasure to meet you, Doctor. Oh, she's off?
She's on.
Ramlachan.
Ramlachan. It's actually Ramlachan.
Ramlachan. Well, I'm easy. I'm Mann.
Mann. You're easy to pronounce.
Yes, but I noticed we share some R's and M's in our name.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah. But we're phonetically pronounceable last names. That's the important thing.
Yes, that is the important thing.
We're the only family of Ramlachans in Trinidad, so Trini's always like to rename me. because we have Ramlachans, Ramlachans, what else? Ramlachan Singh, all kinds of different iterations, but we are the only family of Ramlachans.
It's similar with me. We've got Superman, we've got Batman, we have Garbage Man, we have a whole host of policemen, firemen. I can go on and on. I have a big family.
But you're the one and only man. See, that's the most important thing.
Me and half of the rest of the Homo sapien population. But you're a geneticist, right? You know that.
I am.
Yeah.
Separated by 0.1% of our genetics. That's it. All Homo sapiens, we differ by 0.1%.
And isn't that just spectacularly amazing? So how much DNA do we share with a banana?
60%.
What do you think?
Yeah. It's a good. Chimpanzee. I'm going to quiz you now. How much do we share with a chimpanzee?
99.9%.
No, do you think we're closer to chimpanzees than we are to each other? Could be.
I know some people that's true for, yes.
It's 98.2. So yeah, we're very close.
I was pretty close. I mean, it was close enough for government work. 99.
Definitely.
You know what I find absolutely amazing? That the DNA, et cetera, the genetic material, et cetera, which is basic to life. In addition to that, you have this proton gradient in the mitochondria and in bacteria, which generates energy, is also as essential to life. Just it carries on down. It's beyond belief.
Yeah, I know. No, that's definitely true. But mitochondria were free floating bacteria at some point, huh?
Endosymbiosis.
Right, that we just absorbed. That's incredible.
Well,
right?
either we absorbed them or they invaded us. And it may
one
have,
of the two.
And it may have only happened once in all of the time on Earth. And as a result, I'm telling you stuff so I won't anymore.
No,
but,
we could tell the listeners.
You know how many ATP molecules, ATP synthase, which there are hundreds of them in every mitochondria. How many ATP molecules are thrown off every second?
I don't know. I don't know that one.
It's in the range of 300. So this molecule's spinning at 300 revolutions per second. And there are thousands of them, millions of them in neurons. And that's why the stuff I make is so effective, I believe, because ATP is dependent on vitamin B1 through the Krebs cycle.
Correct.
It's so nice to speak to somebody who actually understands what I'm trying to say.
Who speaks your language?
Good people doing this.
Yeah, and then you see the eyes start to zone out.
Right, exactly. So
don't worry, I just taught that's why I'm late. I just taught a whole class of undergraduate students. So and they were all doing presentations and just zoning out as they, So I'm very familiar with the zone look.
Well, I'm familiar with it also. Maybe it indicates something about what we're talking about, but nonetheless, I find the whole thing to be fascinating, just impossible to comprehend.
I just smile through the whole process, that way everything is hidden behind a smile. Nobody can tell whether I understand or I don't understand because I'm just smiling.
You have to give the nod every now and then. My students have perfected that. They can also sleep with their eyes open, which is a very important tool. Because they're staring straight at you and you ask them a question and they don't even acknowledge that something's been asked. And I'm like, hi. They're like, oh yeah, hi, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, well, that describes me pretty well throughout most of my time in school.
I'm sure not. That's why you're so highly productive now.
You're very kind.
I'm sure you listen to the important things.
You're very kind, thank you, and I'm sure you as well.
So, Dr. Mann, we will see you at 5.
Okay, so I will. I'll reestablish myself on this link at 5 o'clock, and it was a pleasure meeting you both.
You too as well.
Thank you.
Right.
Good afternoon, Dr. Ramlachan. Thank you so much for making yourself available to us. I know you're very busy, and it takes a commitment to be here, and I appreciate that commitment that you've honored. Thank you again.
No problem.
Perhaps we can get straight into everything. We've been doing, and I have been doing some weekly programs at this hour between 4 and 6 p.m. every Wednesday. I felt that the issue and the topic of diabetes and Trinidadians being more mindful of the fact that of the damage that could be done if you have sugar levels that are out of control and diets that are reckless, that there are consequences to see. So I've had some previous doctors, the president of the Diabetes Association, Dr. Danu, and he spoke. And but what I did last week is we had a small program, a short program on diabetes and impotency. And so mainly we started looking at the consequences. So in case persons out there, they tired here, they talk about managing sugar levels, they're bored of the information, they hear but they don't listen. But when you begin to see what effect it may have if you don't, then the consequence may weigh heavily on one's mind, and that may invoke and encourage some sort of change in lifestyle. Having said all of that, I don't think the public cares to hear my voice. I wanted to get from you as a geneticist. Yeah, I got that pronunciation right for the first time. Yes. I wanted to hear your take on it. Now, I know that, and this is my lay position, I understand from the academia and the editorial that I read that type 2 diabetes, which is adult onset, tends to be reversible or manageable with diet and exercise and so on. But you being a geneticist, persons who are born with the condition, the notion is that there isn't anything, your lifestyle would not have brought that on you. You would have been born into a family whose history may have entailed your grandfather had diabetes, your grandmother had it, your father inherited it. Oh, I shouldn't be using the word inherited, I don't know. It passed, there's a notion that it passed from generation to generation.
Well, that's inheritance. You're using it correctly.
Okay. So if you can share with us, what is your take in terms of your specialization as a geneticist? What is your take on one having a predisposition to a diabetic condition? And the second part of the question is, how does one reverse that if it can be reversed?
Okay, so I'll start with my little biological lesson first, right? Yeah. So everybody who's alive, who lives as an organism, whether you're a cow, a pig, or sheep, or human, even if you're a plant, has to maintain what we call homeostasis. Of the things that keep you alive have to be at a certain level in order for you to stay alive, right? So that's the pH of your blood. In the case of a human, your potassium, sodium balance, your nutritional levels, obviously, your water content, all of those things. And that maintenance of homeostasis is what is critical for life and life here on Earth, right? A lot of the genes that encode the enzymes that allow those functions to take place. For example, you take a bite of bread and you start to chew it. The amylase enzyme that starts in your mouth starts to break down the starch and starts to release the sugars as it goes through your body. Different enzymes come into play, and then insulin gets produced from your pancreas, from your islet cells in your pancreas, ideally, and enough insulin gets produced that your cells are not resistant to being able to be triggered by it, and would then now be able to process that glucose and either turn it into energy, as Dr. Mann was saying, using the mitochondria as necessary, or store it as fat if it is in excess, right? And that's the normal biological function of everybody. Those genes encode sequences, and those sequences can mutate. You can get heritable mutations that you get from your mother, your father, your grandfather, your grandmother, and you could pass on to your son and your daughter. And you also can share with your close relatives like siblings and cousins and so on. Or you can get what we call somatic mutations, which occur in the course of your lifetime. And usually somatic mutations occur in the course of your lifetime because of your environment. That would be an example of that would be like the EGFR gene that causes lung cancer becomes triggered by nicotine and tar in smoke. So people who you smoke cigarettes and even vape that have a certain level of those combinations of things can actually turn that gene on, if it is that you have that particular gene and mutation that predisposes you, as you mentioned, or increases your risk of cancer. Some people have those genes and they never get turned on in their lifetime because they haven't exposed themselves to the environmental trigger. So it's a combination. Every single thing that you do in your life and how your genes are expressed to maintain homeostasis, even to advance growth, even to become the fastest racehorse like Secretariat, or become the fastest runner like Usain Bolt, or the fastest, swimmer like Michael Phelps and these guys, is triggered because of your biochemical function that is in part encoded by your genes. So it's not an isolated thing, right? It can't be like, okay, well, I inherit this, so therefore I must have it. So it's a combination of things. And diabetes is exactly the same way. So diabetes type 1 is a monogenic disease, we call it. Diabetes type 2, there are several genes that kind of increase, not several genes come into play to show and to kind of allow your body to metabolize sugars, right? And mutations in many of those genes can predispose you to type 2 diabetes, which is, as we mentioned, later onset than type 1. Type 1 you usually get very early on because it's a more severe type of diabetes where you can't maintain your sugar levels without the introduction of insulin because your pancreas does not produce it. Type 1, you produce insulin normally, but your cells are resistant to it. So it is a secondary condition called insulin resistance that results in type 2 diabetes, right? Now, some people also inherit genes that cause something called hyperinsulinemia. And that hyperinsulinemia gives you very, very high glucose or very, very low glucose. And that is a separate inherited gene. So there are many different genes that come into play that cause different types of metabolic disease, including diabetes.
Wow. So it's a cocktail of factors that could contribute to the onset of diabetes. It could be both a genetic predisposition as well as environmental factors, meaning you are born and bred in an environment where perhaps the diet and the exposure doesn't lend itself to one living a healthy life, or
right,
lend itself to one being able to manage sugar levels readily.
Well, it's a similar thing as to, if you have, I always use this example, Andre Agassi and Steffi Graf got married, right? They were at the top of their game when it comes to tennis players. Both of them. He won many hundreds of trophies and titles, and so did she, for male and female tennis back in the day. Now their son or daughter, I can't remember what they have. They have some children, but I don't remember if it's sons or daughters. Obviously would have had, you would think, have inherited a genetic predisposition to be a good tennis player, right? Wouldn't you agree? If both your parents are world-class tennis players. However, if they never send that child to tennis lessons, if they never fed that child properly, eating junk food every day, never actually did any kind of training, would you think that child would then be able to go on the tennis court and beat everybody else? No, right? So it's exactly the same thing. Regardless of what you inherit, it is the environment that triggers either a gene to get turned or turned off, or triggers the epigenetic effects that cause that production of that particular protein. So this guy who won all these cycling titles, and they stripped him because he was on steroids. Remind me, what's his name?
Lance Armstrong.
Lance, right. Lance Armstrong won a whole bunch of titles. Whether or not he was on steroids at the time or not, we'll leave that aside, right? He had a condition of testicular cancer, right? One might say probably due to the amount of riding he did, because that was basically a lot forcing his cells in his testicles to actually mutate and copy themselves a lot more than another human being, another male human being, because of the exposure and the friction and so on, right? Be that as it may, and whatever the causes of his cancer was, he was able to recover very efficiently from cancer and go on to win several more titles. Again, steroids aside, right? We're not going to get and enhancers aside. We're not going to get into that. But what made him be able to be such a fantastic cyclist, and I would say probably recover from cancer at the rate that he did, in part, of course, due to his drugs and his ability to be able to access them because of his wealth, but he had a very high VO2 max, which is the oxygen capacity of his lungs. It was almost 10 times a normal human. So while you and I will be like, after like 1 mile, or like we can't make it up the hill, he going normal, right? Because his ability to be able to get oxygen in and out of his lungs because of a mutation that he carries on one of his genes was much higher than a normal human being, right? So just like how mutations can cause risk for diseases, mutations can cause advantages as well. So there's certain genes that we test for, that we do eugenics, looking at fitness and looking at your ability to work out, your ability to have cardio events influence your insulin sensitivity. So that would be a direct thing for diabetics. For people who have a propensity for diabetes or already know they've been diagnosed with diabetes, we could actually tell you, okay, well, look, you carry this gene. If you do cardio 5 times a week, 4 times a week, you're all good. You're going to have a much higher ability to be able to allow your insulin to be sensitive, your cells to be sensitive to insulin, and allow your processing of your glucose to be at a much higher level than a normal person, because you have that enhanced ability, right? So people like that have to do their cardio, for example, right? So sometimes it doesn't matter how much drugs you take. If you don't have the genes to be able to process those drugs effectively, you're going to be in a cycle of trying to depend on chemical means to which you cannot, beyond the normal level of a normal human being. Whereas if you compensate your inability to process something like sugar with exercise and with a proper diet, therefore you now putting yourself in a position, whereas you were here, now you're going to be much more here, and the rest of the humans are going to be here. So now you're going to probably be even ahead of normal humans in the way that they can process sugar, and the way that their insulin receptors can respond to insulin.
In your experience, in treating with patients, and I say patients meaning Trinidadians, local people, what would be your first line of advice in relation to treating with a type 1 condition, meaning that you're born with this condition? How should one approach it?
Now, it's a misnomer to say you're born with it, because remember, we're all born with the genes that we have, right? So people are also born with a predisposition for type 2 as well. But the difference with type 1 is that because your enzyme is defective to be able to process insulin, the insulin is just not being produced, right? The only way to do that is to be able to artificially introduce insulin in your body, right? That's it. That's the only means by which we can actually control type 1 diabetes, especially in juvenile type 1 diabetes.
Is there a way, or is there the science afford someone with a genetic with the type 1? Does the science afford, or drugs or diet afford anyone a competitive edge in terms of managing such a condition?
Well, yes, obviously, right? Because if it is you don't have the enzymes to be able to stabilize your sugar levels, your diet is important. For sure. Exercise is important, because the amount of vegetables that you eat, for example, high fiber versus low fiber, processed products versus natural raw foods, those things are going to control the release of sugar in your bloodstream, right? But what I meant before when I said the only way to control it is by introducing insulin, is that if you don't have the ability to produce your own insulin, you have to artificially get it, right, from somewhere else. So that is the number one baseline for treatment of diabetics that have type 1 diabetes. However, what you give to your body nutritionally is going to depend, that is going to influence the rate of release of sugar, i.e. glucose, and the amount of glucose that is released, right? So the amount of insulin that you pump into your body then is going to have to be reflective at the amount of sugar that is produced both artificially and also by your body, right? So it is a direct influence, and it does have a direct impact on the lifestyle and, of course, the longevity of these individuals. Because if it is that your pancreas completely fails, in the case of type 1, that's basically what's happening, and you have to artificially give diabetic drug, which is usually the form of insulin. And now we have insulin that is no longer from the pig and from other species. We actually have human insulin that's produced in bacteria, and that's what these individuals get. So it's actually a human insulin gene that's cloned into bacteria, and then we purify it from the bacteria and we produce it as a drug. So you're actually getting the actual human insulin, right? When you inject insulin in your body, either long term or they call it long acting or short acting, right? Depending on what you're given, and you're usually given both by your doctor, depending on how bad your diabetes are. Both type 2 and type 1 will get either long acting or short acting. And now there's all kinds of things where it's automatically, there's a lot of automatic things that you can buy, devices where it's given to you automatically, and you have every 15 minutes it gives you a readout of what your sugar is, and if it is that you need a injection, there's an insulin pump that's attached to your abdomen, and you're automatically given that, especially for type 1 diabetic children, where their insulin levels tends to drop, and therefore their sugar levels tend to drop drastically during sleep, and sometimes some of them will fall into a diabetic coma and die before the parents even realize. So there are alarms and a lot of things that now the technology is very advanced, that they can live normal lives, well, relatively normal, I should say, and to adulthood and beyond, because of these mechanisms that allow them to intervene, and parents to be able to intervene, to be able to step in and help their kids, and also diagnoses, right? A lot of the foreign countries, first world nations like the UK, Canada, US, Europe, have what we call newborn screening. And newborn screening screens for usually about 161 genes that cause the more popular pediatric diseases like type 1 diabetes. So they know from birth right away what the child has, and can intervene almost immediately. Okay.
I may have missed something in the last few sentences. So you're saying with a newborn child, it is possible to
newborn screening. Yeah, I was talking about newborn screening, which is available to every child born in the UK, Australia, US, and certain European countries, where they are screened automatically using blood draw from their heel for about 166 of the most common genetic pediatric disorders, including type 1 diabetes. So they know within the first 2 weeks of birth, sometimes less, usually 24 hours, depending on how fast the lab is who does it, at least between 1 day and 14 days, exactly what these individuals are at risk for and what conditions they're born with.
Wow, I thought I heard that. And do we have that here? You mentioned specific countries. So a child born in Mount Hope or any of our general hospitals, do we have that sort of facility here within 14 days? We can have that newborn screening done?
I do it.
Wow.
But it's not done by the government for free, if that's what you're asking. No. It's not part of our public healthcare system. So we were trying to incorporate it probably 2 governments ago, I want to say, and it didn't actually happen. It's still something that we've been trying to get people to understand the importance of, and thereby allow them to influence their policymakers and government decision makers of the importance. Because can you imagine if we're able to diagnose these diseases at birth, and in some cases prevent it? Because in some cases just an injection, it's just a drug that they take, once a day, and they're fine. They never ever show symptoms of the disease that causes them to be in the NICU or the PICU or the ICU, and we have to spend $5 million per month trying to keep them alive. I mean, the toss-up is so obvious that almost every first world nation offers it at birth as part of their healthcare system.
Is this covered by this sort of care covered by insurance companies locally, in your knowledge?
It depends. If it's diagnostic, yes. Right. They don't cover it if it's prophylactic. So if you just I wonder what I have, and you come to me and you say, I feel like I want to do this test or this test or this test, I can do it, but it's not covered by insurance. If you show a symptom, and your GP or your specialist doctor suspects a genetic disorder and has decided to send you for genetic testing, or you yourself have been diagnosed with a disorder and you want to determine what is the mutation, or for people who have cancer and they want to find out what their tumor mutation is, because that will infer for treatment and surgery and all of those kinds of things. Those kinds of things are covered by insurance 100%. In terms of your coverage, right? In terms of up to your level of coverage, but it is not deniable because it's a diagnostic test for a particular disease that you have or you suspect you have, or it should not be, I should say, should not be, something that they cannot cover. It should be coverable. But if it is I just want to know and I just want to see, no. But that is why they offer it at the birth level in public hospitals around the world, because insurance does not cover it. So the government sees it as a means by which they save themselves money.
I don't want to put you in a particular spot. If you can't answer the question, you're free to say so. Is there any particular reason why we have not been able to implement this at the general hospitals in Trinidad and Tobago?
Just interest. I mean, I would say interest. And of course, money. Everything costs money, right? So you would have to have interested parties pushing it: the pediatricians, the medical doctors, the parents, the public would have to be able to demand it in a way, and ask for it. But as with every public health system, there's going to be a priority, and there's going to be a priority based on what they need to, as we say, put out the fire, versus what they need to prevent the fire, right? So traditionally, our preventative strategies have not been high on our list of public spending. It's almost always the putting out the fire strategies. And I mean, that is part of public policy making, and I'm not part of the public health system. I always say that first off the bat. I'm a private individual. I may work for a public university, but that's my extent of public decision making. I'm not part of that whole process at all. But it just, it comes down to knowledge. It comes down to, for example, the NHS now in the UK. Every single person basically who goes to the NHS gives a blood or saliva sample that enters into the genomic database. So their information is extremely well organized, well detailed. I mean, it's fantastic what has come from that genome project. That is the UK genome database push, and that happened. It started happening about 10 years ago, and now it's pretty much part and parcel of living in the
UK. I read recently that it has been said that 428 million people live with diabetes around the world.
And that's known, huh? That's known, because a lot of people have it and do not know and have never been diagnosed.
One piece of data indicated that 180,000 people live with diabetes in Trinidad and Tobago. Another 60 to 80,000 people may be living with it and not know so.
I would say more. In my experience, more.
It was even put in the public space that, I'm quoting here, Medical Director at the Southwest Regional Health Authority, Dr. Albert Prasad, said lawmakers should seriously consider introducing a sugar tax. In the same way that we have so many taxes, I guess the insinuation, or what is being said impliedly, is if we control the availability and access to sugar, or create some sort of discrimination by way of pricing, that may discourage people's, or monitor or cause people to manage their intake of sugar. How based on the data that is out there, there are people out there listening to us who may think, well, this is scare tactics by the state, that like everything else, they exaggerate the material out there. In your experience as a doctor, as a geneticist, how much of a danger is diabetes to one's longevity in terms of living a healthy life free from unlimited restrictions that could, in other words, cause us to not live a comfortable existence? Is it that our intake of sugar is so detrimental, or reckless intake of sugar is so detrimental to our longevity that we ought to make it a priority?
Well, there's data that shows, and there's on NCBI and these medical websites, you can look it up yourself, that shows that individuals of people who've been diagnosed with diabetes, depending on the age of diagnosis, their lifespan is up to, in some cases, 20 years shorter than somebody who a pair in their same environment and the same age who does not have diabetes. So it's a direct correlation. It's like that. So 100% your lifespan, and also your life, not just your longevity, but your quality of life is going to be impacted quite. Who wants to live with a needle sticking them in the arm every 15 minutes, right? Or potentially, or having to have a big insulin pack on your waist, or worse yet, having to run to the fridge for your needles every time you have a candy and your number shot up. Your quality of life is 100% impacted. So it's not only longevity. I mean, yes, you might be dying 20 years earlier than somebody who doesn't have diabetes. And somebody who doesn't have controlled diabetes. That's really the most important thing. But not only that, the things that could happen to you: stroke, heart, cardiac disease. All of these things are related to diabetes, because diabetes is a immunogenetic disease, yes, in that it affects your immune system. It's almost like your cells are attacking your islet cells of your pancreas, and your receptors on your own cells that stop the recognition of the insulin in some cases, and in the case of type 1, stops the production of the insulin completely. So in a sense, it's an autoimmune disease. And yes, you can't do anything about that, in that if you inherit the inability to produce insulin, you inherit it, and you can't do anything about that. The only thing you could do is take insulin artificially. But you cannot, as a type 1 diabetic, go into a bar and drink 40 drinks, go and eat 50 packs of KFC, go and have 2 chocolate cakes and expect to be alive the next day. Regardless of how much insulin you pump in your body, you're not going to be able to overcome that glucose level, right, increase, and that immediate glucose level increase. And similarly, it's the same kind of idea. You have a whole set of other nosocomial conditions that occur. Some people lose their toes, right? Something so simple as vasculature issues. You get a cut under your foot. I remember my grandmother being diabetic and walking in her garden, and she had a cut under her foot and nobody knew, and eventually became gangrene. She didn't lose her foot, thank God, but it was weeks. And I think my aunt only realized because she smelt it, right? Like, that's how, because they are completely unaware, because their vasculature has failed. So they have diabetic neuropathy, where your nerves completely fail. So you can't even feel your external organs. Blood is not flowing properly to these organs. You might lose them. Your appendages, your toes, your nails, your fingers. Toes, your fingernails, your fingers. Sorry, I only say nails. Fingers, your ears. Some people have lost their face spots because of diabetes in colder countries and so on, where frostbite is a problem and all of that kind of thing, when they don't know that they've experienced frostbite, right? It comes as an injury, and they're not aware, and they end up losing their appendage. So it's not just that you're dying from diabetes and that your kidneys will fail and you're going to be on dialysis. There's a lot of things that could happen to you before that, and your life can end either suddenly through a diabetic coma or something like that, where even a diabetic coma is not suddenly. That's a bad example. But your life could have suddenly, like a stroke or a heart attack that takes your life immediately. Or you have that long gray area between black and white, where you exist, but you're bedridden. You have to take all kinds of drugs. You have to be on, dialysis is an issue. Whether or not you have to have a stent put in, whether or not you have to have triple bypass because, your arteries are all blocked. All of those things are related to diabetes, because it's a vasculature disease, and people don't realize that it actually causes your narrowing of your arteries. I went to school with an MD PhD student who was a Mexican American, and he had a very similar demographic that he was working with that we have in Trinidad, really, right? So a bunch of fried food eating, tendency to be obese kind of individuals, very sedentary, and that was the demographic that he was working with. And he says he used to always use the analogy of a boulder being sugar, and a pipe being your vein or your artery. And here you have this boulder, which is your sugar molecule, pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding this pipe as it goes along, right? So in addition to the inability to break it down, it exists as a boulder in your pipes, which are your veins and your arteries. And what do you think is going to happen over time? Your veins and your arteries are going to start to get gouged out, right? Because of these sugar molecules and the so-called boulders pounding it. And they're going to try to compensate it by putting plaque. If you have atherosclerosis and if you have those things, yes, they have genetic predisposition. But if you constantly create these physical gouges in your arteries and your veins, and your body constantly tries to have to heal it by packing on plaque, right? What's going to happen to that pipe of water, in the analogy, right? Eventually it's going to become blocked and nothing's going to flow. And that's every single artery and vein in your body, not just the ones going to your lungs, your heart, but the ones going to your lungs, the ones going to your liver, the ones going to your kidney. That's how come we say diabetes is a systemic disease, right? So that's one of the things that I would say is that it is a very curable disease, in that once you know you have it, there are many, many things you can do to treat it and also prevent the occurrence, because you can live with a predisposition to diabetes and never have diabetes. These guys who have diabetes that look normal, act normal. This big actress, Hailey Berry, she is a diabetic, right? And she has been able to compensate. If you hear her interviews, she's very, very open about it. And she says what she does. She practices, I guess it's not really intermittent fasting, but it's fasting. She doesn't start eating before 9 o'clock, and she stops eating at 6 o'clock. Right? So that way she gives her body enough time to be able to process the sugar before it is at rest. Right? And she doesn't start eating too early, and her portions are very small. And I think she has 6 meals a day or something like that. So there are different ways that you can control it and live with it so that you're able to have a normal lifestyle. So these things are very treatable. It's not a death sentence, but in the same breath, you can't just say, oh, I have diabetes, my doctor told me I have sugar, and then go about your business as usual. Because then you're obviously going to have the effects of that condition, that it's going to come upon you a lot faster and a lot more furiously.
Well, from what you're saying, clearly, early detection is important.
100%.
And then you have to have the correct attitude to treat with the condition, a personal attitude and a personal approach to it. Rather, in that way, you're in a position where you have a head start in treating with the condition and the onset and the life that comes with it.
But it's a conscious decision, right? We see this all the time in genetic testing with individuals who have the EGFR mutation I mentioned before. It predisposes you to lung cancer and things like that, and they're still smoking. Right? They're individuals who understand, who have seen their parents or their grandparents or their uncles die from lung cancer, who've smoked their whole life and they continue to smoke. And these individuals know that they have the mutation. They know that they're predisposed to lung cancer. And in some cases, 90% higher risk than a normal person in the population. And they will still smoke. And that is exactly true for people who have diabetes or who are predisposed to diabetes. Now, because your mother, your father are diabetic, or your uncle or your aunt are diabetic, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are diabetic in terms of genetic predisposition, It just means that it could be that their lifestyle allowed for mutations to occur in their lifetime that predispose them to disease. Now, it is better for you to check. And I always tell people it is better for you to check, because if you have something like INSR mutation, that's hyperinsulinemia, that occurs both ways, right? That my family has that. And it can raise you all the way up and it can bring you all the way down. So you have to be maintained on a very, very tight level. And the way that you maintain that very tight level is not only through drugs, but it's through diet and through exercise. If it is that we don't diet and exercise and you have an INSR mutation, you pretty much just signing your death sentence, regardless of what has happened in your family previously or after. You have to have that knowledge. And I always tell everybody, knowledge is power. Same thing with our nutritional deficiencies. We have tests where we look to see whether you're vitamin A deficient, vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin E, whether you're gluten intolerant, whether or not you're lactose intolerant genetically. And I mentioned the insulin with cardio. Insulin, that gene that we look at is an exercise gene, but it tells you how you are able to respond to it, how your body responds to insulin with cardio exercise. And that's a real important one, because if you could balance out your insulin with exercise, like for me, I know for sure, if I'm doing cardio 4 or 5 times a week, my sugar levels are perfect. If I don't do it, then I fight in with that little piece of bread like this big, or little piece of rice like this big, because it's not going to work out for me. And if I eat normally and eat normal portions.
All right. Dr. Ramlachan, I want to thank you for making yourself available this afternoon. I know it's been 45 minutes already, 35 and 10. So what I would propose to do, and I'm hoping that I will liaise with you offline, is to perhaps when you have a more open schedule and we can coordinate again, that we can have another session where we can
sure.
Okay, but it's been a great introduction. Thank you so much.
I think it's important to inform the public too about genetic testing and the importance of knowing. A lot of people like do the ostrich head in the sand thing, and really these days with gene therapies and with pharmacogenetics and with personalized medicine, you don't want to do that, because we actually have the ability to be either cure you, treat you, or prevent disease in a way that we never did before if we know what mutations you have. So I thank you for this visit, and I welcome any opportunity to speak to your listeners and the public, of course, as usual, doing my part.
So we'll liaise again. Thank you so much. Enjoy your evening.
You too. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
David, we should have Dr. Mann. Great. Good afternoon again, Dr. Mann. Thank you so much for rejoining us. I know we overstepped in our time a bit, but you're here with us.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's a privilege. It's an honor to be here. And I want to say I'm very impressed by your last guest, how brilliant and how erudite her discussion was. It's going to be a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best.
All right. One of the problems that we've been having in Trinidad and Tobago, it's just last year, in terms of the data, 278 persons lost limbs. And that data reflects that they lost limbs as a result of a mismanagement of their diabetic condition, simply meaning that their abuse of food or their inability to manage their condition has consequentially resulted in, if I'm using the word correctly, you're the doctor here, neuropathy problems, nerve ending problems, and that amputation is a natural follow through when it is one has an onset of that sort of condition. But you're the bright one here. Tell us something about the work you do and some of the observations you've made in relation to persons who mismanage diabetic conditions.
Well, I'm a specialist in the feet and legs, a lower extremity specialist, and I practice in the state, or practiced. I recently slowed my practice down. I'm a podiatric surgeon, and I treat problems of the feet. And as a result, I've seen a lot of problems with respect to diabetes and the feet. And as your last guest alluded to, this is a highly significant problem. This is a systemic problem. And because the feet are furthest away from the heart and the brain, the nerves, the nervous system and the blood flow to the feet is most endangered by any problem at all. And diabetes is a problem that causes problems with respect to the nerves and the blood flow. There are immune issues, wound healing issues, etc. And we could go on for a very long time about that. The condition that you spoke about was peripheral neuropathy. So peripheral neuropathy is a numbness, tingling, burning, shooting pains in essentially your feet and legs. Peripheral means away from the brain and away from the heart. So in the periphery of your body, You have a central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. And then you have a peripheral nervous system, which is the other stuff that's away from the central nervous system. And when the nerves in your feet and legs or of the peripheral nervous system don't function properly, it expresses itself. You know that if you're aware of it, because you'll have numbness, tingling, burning, or shooting pains in your feet and legs. You'll realize you don't feel things as you did before, and you've got some tingling, some chronic tingling, and that's generally how it presents itself. This is it's the major cause of amputations and of the lower extremities. And the reason that is because it makes your feet vulnerable to injury. So when I'm walking and I'm barefooted and I walk and I step on something sharp, if my nervous system or my nerves are intact, I withdraw my foot immediately before I do myself as much harm as I would had I not had the ability to feel what my foot is doing. So someone with an impaired peripheral nerves or peripheral neuropathy is much more prone to develop wounds from external causes. The most common reason we get wounds is probably poor shoe gear, and we'll discuss about ways in which we can prevent amputations in a little bit. But you have to protect your feet, because if you get a wound as a diabetic, and I would suggest that 90% of the people you mentioned who underwent amputations on your beautiful islands of Trinidad and Tobago were diabetics. That's the number. That's how severe diabetes are with respect to amputations of the feet and legs. I would suggest that if you do that, you have to protect your feet, because you just don't have the ability to heal your wound. Your last guest mentioned something very, very clever. I think she talked about her aunt who had developed a wound. She was diabetic. She developed a wound, didn't know it until somebody smelled her foot. And that's what happens. You see it commonly in practice. Someone will come to you and they'll say, my sock is bloody. And you take a look at the foot, and the wound that they have goes all the way down to the bone. And at that point, it's very, very difficult to treat and to heal, and often to save a life, because you have an infection that's ascending up the foot and leg. You have to do an amputation. You want to prevent that. So lower extremity amputation prevention is very, very important, and we're going to be speaking about that in a little bit. I'd like to say that. So if you have a wound, if you hurt yourself and you develop a wound and you don't know it, you present to the doctor with something that's much more difficult to heal and much more dangerous than if you had a little scratch. You realized it immediately because your nervous system is working properly. You feel there's something wrong there, and you take a look and you realize you got a little bit of a wound, and you run to the doctor as quickly as possible. So decreased nervous system function in the feet and legs, which you call peripheral neuropathy being a pathology of the nerve, so neuropathy. Increased peripheral neuropathy is a leading cause of diabetic amputations. And that's because the diabetic doesn't realize they have a problem until another thing happens, like there's a smell, they see blood on the sock, they see blood in their shoe, they get a fever, there's redness coming up their leg because they have an infection that's ascending up their feet and legs. And as a result, they realize they have a problem when it's much more difficult for the physician to heal the problem.
Wow. So in the example that you used, where our previous guest mentioned that there was a smell, and then from the smell they were able to detect, well, there's a problem with her aunt's leg. A common sense approach would be for an individual to self-examine their body parts, so to speak, meaning their extremities, their feet, to ensure that there isn't any issue, because with the damage to the nerve endings, you're not feeling it. It's a simple process of your nerve endings the reaction of your nerve endings will tend to send messages to your brain that something is wrong there, and you look. But if it is there's nerve ending damage, then you don't get that message being sent to the brain. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm a lay person here. Are you recommending, how does one treat with or are you recommending that we self-examine to look for whether there are any cuts or untreated areas that perhaps reflect an area of concern?
Yes, let me answer that question. First of all, I want to give an example and talk about the severity of what we're talking about. So I had a gentleman who was a new patient to me, and he came into my office, and he had a sizable hole on the top of his foot, by his big toe. We're talking about a hole this big on the big toe.
Wow.
And it went down to bone. And I asked him what happened. And he said that he was traveling, he was coming home, and he had to take his shoes off at the airport for security. And he went ahead and put his shoes on that belt, and he put his keys in his shoe. And he scanned it, and then he went back on the other side of the scanner and put his shoes on and walked around until he got home. And when he got home, he realized there was blood in his shoe. And then he realized and saw this wound. So his sensation from diabetes was so terribly impaired that he didn't feel what I just described to you. And if you hang out, if you socialize with foot doctors like I do, we've all got a story. Someone will tell you about a little toy truck, a Tonka toy truck, those miniature trucks that was in the shoe. And as a result, the patient lost their life or their leg or their foot. And this constant, so you go to a foot doctor convention, we're talking about wound care. Everybody's got a picture of something absurd that was in a shoe. So this is really quite extensive. And this can lead to amputations, and if the amputation isn't successful in preventing an ascending infection, you can even die from it. So there are things you can do as a diabetic to minimize the chances of this happening. One of the things that you spoke about was inspecting your feet. And as a diabetic, and I think as anybody with feet, you should inspect them every day. You should take a very close look at what's going on your foot. Is it red? Is there a hole? Is there pus? Is there blood? Is there blood on the sock? Is there blood on the shoe? And if you can't do it because you're unable to look at your feet successfully, you should take a mirror. Make sure you look in between your toes or throughout all of your foot. And if you can't manage to do that with a mirror, then you should have somebody do it for you, a loved one or someone else do it for you. And you should do this every day. And you should do it if you think you've been in an environment where you may have hurt yourself, because the sooner you get to a physician with a wound, the more likely it is that that wound can be closed without amputating. So the further along a wound is, the more difficult it is to heal the wound. And by the way, in that story about this fellow who went to the airport screening device, thank goodness I was able to heal him. And we were able to give him some nutrients that we'll talk about in a little bit, I guess, which increased his sensation. And that's remarkable. And that's one of the things you want to try and do, is to restore sensation as much as possible. You also don't want to ever walk around barefooted. And I'm talking about when you go from your bed to your bathroom, you should put on sandals. You shouldn't walk around in your house barefooted. You can never tell what happened to the carpeting or the floor. Did someone break a glass 3 weeks ago, and now all of a sudden one of those pieces of glass migrated to where you were walking? Did you take a pin out of a shirt that you just bought and it fell? And you'd be surprised at how many times you'll take an x-ray of a diabetic foot and you'll see a pin in there, and it may have been in there for 5 years. Or something else, some other metallic object that punctured the skin. No one knew about it. It closed. They're not feeling any pain from it, so it's an incidental finding. You just happen to find a pin inside of the foot of a diabetic. These people are extraordinarily lucky in that this wound healed over the foreign body, the pin, and no serious problem occurred as a result of that. So you want to make sure that you inspect your feet every day to make certain that you haven't damaged yourself. You want to take your shoes, and you never want to walk barefooted. Always wear something. And stockings and socks are not adequate. You need something that's going to prevent a puncture of an object that you're unaware that you stepped on. One of the biggest causes of problems with the feet are improperly fitting shoes. So there was a study that was done a while back in Barbados, and they took a look at these plastic sandals, the flip-flops with the piece of material going in between the big toe and the second toe. And these are disastrous for people with diabetes. You don't want to wear these. You don't want to wear ill-fitting shoes. You don't want to wear plastic shoes. You don't want to wear shoes that don't fit you properly. How would you know if the skin on your big toe or your little toe is being scraped off by an improperly fitting shoe if you can't feel it? So you want to make sure that you have a good pair of shoes. I suggest athletic shoes if you're unable to get a shoe specifically made for diabetics, because the inside of the shoe is very important as well. So when you put your shoes on in the morning, or whenever you put them on, you have to take them and shake them out. And you make sure you don't have any stones, no pebbles, or no other objects in the shoe that can cause you damage. And if you do, don't put your shoe on. Get rid of all that stuff. Also, put your hand in the shoe and feel the inside of the shoe. It's not uncommon for inexpensive shoes that have heels on them that are attached with little nails for some of the inner material of the shoe to degrade. And all of a sudden, there's a sharp nail sticking in to the compartment where your foot is. And you don't feel it if you don't feel your foot. So you can feel it with your hand. And if in the odd case that your hands are so insensitive that you can't feel with your hand, have somebody else do that for you, of course. But you want to make sure the shoe doesn't damage you. Shoes have seams. Inexpensive shoes have seams that are not put together very well. And the seam can scrape off the skin of your foot. And you may not realize that you're putting your foot in danger if you don't inspect the shoe. And if the shoe's not in good shape, you shouldn't even be wearing it. You throw it out. This is a major cause of lower extremity wounds that subsequently go on to amputations. In this study in Barbados that I was talking about, the authors projected that 2/3 of all lower extremity amputations would be prevented with proper shoe gear. It's a very powerful statement. And it's something that's very, very doable, and it's something that is very important to keep in mind. Of course, as your previous guest mentioned, you want to do everything to stop the progression of diabetes, etc. Eat properly, exercise properly. No one could possibly argue with that. And I agree 100%. We're talking about people who at this point are diabetic, and they're looking to protect themselves from the ravages of the disease. The numbers that I've been able to determine with respect to the Caribbean is about 1% of all diabetics have a lower extremity amputation. That's a piece of the toe or a piece of the foot or a piece of the leg, or an amputation above the ankle. I think the number that I saw was 600, an amputation above the ankle on a yearly basis. And we postulate at about 900 in front of the ankle, part of the toe or part of the foot, etc. You're looking at 1,500 amputations, according to the latest numbers that I saw, across the island of Trinidad and Tobago. And I think you're looking at about 150,000 diabetics. So you're looking at about a 1% amputation rate per year if you're a diabetic. If you don't take care of yourself, you're at the mercy of those numbers. And if you're going to be a diabetic for 20 years, then each year you have a 1% chance of having an amputation or a part of your foot being lost. I mean, do the math. So you have to be very, very careful about that. This is an epidemic of dramatic proportion. And there are lots of things that can be done to minimize the chances of that occurring. May I go over some of them with you?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
I think it's important for you to learn how to live and work with diabetes. You have to go to a diabetic educator or go to somebody who is knowledgeable about it. Your physician is probably an excellent choice, or a diabetic educator, and find out what you should be eating, how you should be exercising, what foods you should avoid. Obviously, you should avoid sweet drinks, you should avoid candies, you should avoid sugary drinks, and etc. It's obvious that you want to avoid that as much as possible. But there are other subtleties involved in what you eat that are not obvious, and a diabetic educator or your physician can certainly help you manage all that. You want to make sure that your blood sugar is in check. You want to check or take a look at your blood sugar on a regular basis and make sure that your lifestyle is keeping your blood sugar at very, very low levels, because the higher the levels of your blood sugar are, the more likely you are to have the consequences of diabetes, the ravages of diabetes, which, by the way, are not confined to your feet. All your organ systems get involved. Diabetes is the most common cause of renal dialysis. It's the most common cause of blindness. It's a horrible disease. It's the most common cause of amputations. And as we talked about before, it significantly impairs your lifestyle. The quality of life is significantly diminished, and the length of your life is significantly diminished. You want to make sure that you clean and inspect your feet every day. Not every other day, not every week, but every day. Look in between your toes. Look at every part of your feet. Clean your feet. Make sure that there's nothing going on there. And if you do see something, if you see a cut, if you see some blood, if you smell something bad, if you see some pus, get to the doctor right away. The quicker you get in, the better off you are. You want to also make sure that your socks don't have a seam in them. You know, there are socks that are made and they have a seam up by the toes, and the seam is not smooth. And if you put that sock on, you can cut yourself with the seam. And there are special diabetic socks that you can use, which are obviously highly preferable to something like that. And very importantly, don't be a bathroom surgeon. I did my residency, I think in the year 1642, but now at this time. Now, 50 or 45 years ago when I did my residency, I remember my residency director, every day he'd say, don't be a bathroom surgeon. And that means don't cut your own nails. If you can't feel your toenails, if you can't feel your feet, and you take a toenail nipper, and your eyes are not good because you have diabetes, and you cut your nail, and you happen to get a piece of skin into the nail nipper, and you didn't feel it, so that you cut your skin, that could lead to a tragedy. Don't do that. Have a professional cut your nails and your calluses. And don't go ahead and cut away with a razor blade. This is a recipe for a disaster. Be very good to your feet. Treat them well. They're very, very important. And I think that I should mention also the consequences of a lower extremity amputation, especially a large part of your foot or above the ankle. Think about that. First off, financially, I think someone estimated the cost of an amputation to be about 200,000 Trinidadian dollars to the healthcare system. But more than that, think about your inability to work, your inability to socialize as you used to ambulate, to exercise, the financial and the emotional consequences. Some people have terrible emotional reactions to losing a part of their body, and it's quite understandable. So you want to try and prevent this as aggressively as you possibly can. And you want to do everything you can to try and improve sensation. And you want to make sure you have an ongoing relationship with a physician. Use whatever medicines you need. Listen to your physician. Keep your blood pressure in check. If you need medications to improve the quality of your medical condition, you should take them. We launched in Trinidad and Tobago about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, a nutrient that I've been working with for the past 20 years in the U.S., and the nutrient has shown some great, great results in improving sensation in the nerves to the feet and legs. The reason for it is that diabetics tend to be vitamin B1 deficient. It has to do with kidney issues. And vitamin B1 deficiency in and of itself will cause a peripheral neuropathy. It's common in diabetics. And as a result of restoring vitamin B1 levels, we often get a significant improvement in sensation. And it's not just sensation. Diabetic peripheral neuropathy can be extraordinarily painful. Neuropathic pain is a horrible pain. It's just an ongoing pain that you have to take medicines that suppress your nervous system in order to manage it. And sometimes that doesn't even do the trick. It can be burning, it can be tingling, it can be sharp shooting pains. You want to manage it, and all of those conditions, they accompany numbness. So if you have a lot of burning in your feet, you're not feeling your feet because your nerves are overwhelmed with the sensation of numbness. And if you're walking and you can't feel your feet where they are, well, you know is that they hurt you. So you want to try and restore sensation as best you can. I think that's a nutrient issue, and that's the nutrient we introduced into Trinidad and Tobago, and it works rather successfully in improving not only nervous system function in the feet and legs, but also in other parts of your body as well. So you want to try and prevent the problem. The acronym for that is LEAP, Lower Extremity Amputation Prevention, and that's what we're talking about here. So there are things you can do to lessen the chance of your having a tragedy as a result of your diabetes causing you to have a wound as a result of your not having felt the insult or the trauma to your feet. And there's really no reason not to do any of these things. And hopefully it'll prevent you from having a tragedy of an amputation, and also remarkably and dramatically improve the quality of your life.
Could you tell us more about the drug that is on the market that could assist?
Well, it's a nutrient. It's not a drug. There are drugs that you can use if you're having burning, tingling, and shooting pains. And these drugs suppress the nervous system. They tend to be a tranquilizer, an anti-seizure medicines, etc. They suppress the nervous system, and sometimes you have to be on them. But what happened to me about 20 years ago, I had a patient come into my office. Now, I practice in South Florida, and the patient had terrible neuropathy, and there was very little we could do for her. And she left town for about 6 months. And she came back in December. She left in April, came back in December, and I asked her how her neuropathy was. And she said, "Oh, that's all gone, Dr. Mann, but I have this problem with my big toenail." And I said, "What do you mean that's all gone? Neuropathy doesn't go away." She said, "Well, mine did." And it turned out, I said to her, "So how did that happen?" She said, "Well, I was in Switzerland, and they gave me this stuff, and it took my neuropathy away." So what do you think I asked the patient? What's the name of that stuff? Interestingly, that changed my life. So it was a nutrient that had been around since 1960 in Japan. It went into Europe in 1978, and it was really going worldwide. I introduced it into the U.S. about 18 years ago, and we introduced it in Trinidad and Tobago a year and a half ago to 2 years ago through All Care Home Services. The name of the nutrient is New Remedy. The active ingredient, or the key ingredient in it, is something called benfotiamine, which for all intents and purposes is a super effective vitamin B1. And originally we didn't know why it was helping people with diabetes and the neuropathy. And then it turned out further studies showed that diabetics are inherently vitamin B1 deficient. It has to do with their kidneys not working properly and them going into low B1 levels. This is also true for what is another major cause of peripheral neuropathy, which is alcohol use disorder or drinking too much alcohol. Alcohol damages the nerves just in and of the fact that it's toxic to the nerves, but also it damages those molecules in your stomach and intestines which help you absorb vitamin B1. So if you drink too much, you have an inability to absorb as much vitamin B1 as you'd like, as you should, and as a result, you go into vitamin B1 deficiency as well. and that causes the neuropathy, or can cause a neuropathy as well. It seems as though vitamin B1 deficiency is common cause of peripheral neuropathy, and it really has not been recognized as such, but it's getting more and more recognized because we're getting such good results with patients who are having restoration of sensation or decrease in pain. What happens with these people is within a month's time, they get this improvement in their sensation, often, not always, but often. And that's a result, I believe, of restoring vitamin B1 levels. And you'll find very interestingly that when they stop taking the vitamin, and everybody stops taking the vitamin, no one wants to take pills if they don't have to. Within a month or two, the neuropathic sensations, the numbness, tingling, burning, etc., come back because they go back into vitamin B1 deficiency. So that's, I think, a major step that we've made, and it's a major nutrient that's available to our friends in Trinidad and Tobago to help to restore the ability for them to feel in their feet and legs and other parts of their body as well.
The vitamin B1, is there a relationship between vitamin B1 and the food that we eat? I know that you're saying that we can try the nutrients. All is well and good. Can someone or an individual increase the vitamin B1 that is required by organic means in terms of the food that they eat or things that they do? Or is it that once you get to that point where you have nerve damage, that the only mechanism to treat with it would be by orally in terms of taking the nutrients?
Well, vitamin B1 is in our food. So foods like pork and beans and 100 different other types of foods have vitamin B1 in it. It's a vitamin because we don't make it, as our body does not make vitamin B1 or any other vitamin. That's the definition of a vitamin. So you have to ingest it, and you have to have it in your food. And you can take vitamin B1 pills in the stores, and that'll increase your vitamin B1 levels as well. But once you have this sort of nerve damage that we're talking about, the nerve damage is not going to be reversed by eating a lot of pork or by taking vitamin B1 pills in another form, unless you take massive amounts of them. What you need is a way of getting vitamin B1 into your blood and your body at high levels. And it turns out, fortunately, that the nutrient that we use, which is a derivative of vitamin B1, it's called benfotiamine, and the commercial name of the product is New Remedy. The nutrient that we use gives you very high levels of vitamin B1 in your blood, and that acts in a manner that helps to restore the ability of the nerves. Often, it helps to restore it. You know, when I give it to patients, I say, I want you to take these pills and come back in a month. And I always say to them, and if you're fortunate, this will help you. Because there's no guarantee that it will help you. It doesn't help everybody, but it helps more, my personal opinion, it helps over 50% of the people you give it to, which is rather remarkable. And this is still something that we're learning about. This also happens in the brain, by the way, and I don't want to get into it because we're talking about neuropathy and diabetes, etc. But there are changes in the brain that happen that parallel what's going on in your feet and legs, which we're discovering the main ingredient in the remedy is benfotiamine, may be very helpful for.
Wow. The thing with Caribbean people is we do a lot of things in terms of we walk on the beach bare feet, we go to the rivers bare feet. For someone like myself, I like to walk the beach and feel the sand on between my toes and feel the waves crashing against my ankles. So it's a real education in speaking to you that one has to be more mindful of, walking bare feet. Bare feet is such an important ingredient in Caribbean life. We tend to be more outdoors than most people. No.
But Fareed, if you don't mind my interrupting, it's not as though you have to stay home and sit in a chair. You should be exercising. You should be walking. But when you walk on the beach, put on slippers that are designed. There are slippers that you can buy. They have a rubber sole, and there's mesh, and you can walk in the sand and you can enjoy yourself. And if you don't have neuropathy, of course, you always can damage yourself. You have to choose what level of caution you want to have. But if you don't have neuropathy and you're not a diabetic, there's no reason not to live your life the way you just described. Of course, you're more vulnerable than someone who wasn't wearing some protective slipper, but you can do that. The thing is, if you are at risk, and you are afraid that you're going to have this complication of diabetes or alcoholism, if you are at risk, there are things you can do to prevent it. Now, nobody wants to, not walk barefooted on the sand. Everybody likes that. You don't have to be Caribbean to like that. It's a natural, enjoyable pastime. But if you are at risk of having a wound, you have to moderate your activity so that you're protected. And you have to watch what you eat as well so that your blood sugars become more controlled and the damage that diabetes does to your body is minimized. I'm sure that alcohol is well enjoyed in the Caribbean as it is in my hometown, right? But you shouldn't drink if you have diabetes. It's as simple as that. And I know many of your diabetics out there are very unhappy that I just said it. But you shouldn't. It's toxic to your nerves. You shouldn't. It's just not a good idea. If you do, minimize as much as you can. But the truth is that you have to adjust your lifestyle if you want to live a higher quality of life and you want to avoid certain tragedies that are avoidable. You shouldn't smoke either. I mean, smoking is a great example. And secondhand smoke. You don't want to be in a house or a car with someone who smokes. If you can smell it, you're smoking. So, and that's highly toxic, especially if you're diabetic, but even if you're not diabetic. So, in my generation, I don't know anybody who didn't smoke when they were a teenager. We all did. Mickey Mantle on the baseball team was a big smoker. So was Willie Mays, and they advertised in the magazines, and we thought it was great. And the information about the tragedy that smoking caused was suppressed by commercial interests for many years, but now we know that smoking is treacherous and will kill you. You have to stop smoking if you don't want to succumb to the horrible consequences of the ingestion, of the inhalation of tobacco. And it's also, chewing tobacco and cigars, etc. And this is not good news if you like to do those things. But then you have to make a personal decision as to whether or not you want to adjust your activities so that you live a longer life with higher quality.
In the year 2019,
I'm sorry, say that again?
In the year 2019,
yes,
in Trinidad and Tobago, the state decriminalized. It's still a criminal offense to be in possession of marijuana. It's still a criminal offense to be making use of it, but they limited the. It's no longer a criminal offense to be in possession of small amounts. I'm saying that to say this. Quite often we hear on the streets, so we hear in the public spaces that people use marijuana as a means to ease body pains and body aches. I'm just trying to get a response from you with regard to whether that is recommended or not recommended, whether there's a medical basis for marijuana use in easing pain of this nature.
Well, firstly, I think the jury is still out. You can read studies that show that marijuana will, or the active ingredient in marijuana, will suppress neuropathic pain, and I think that you might be able to make that case. But I don't see how anybody would ever smoke it and damage their lungs as opposed to eating it with an edible. And it's questionable if that would work.
Right.
But certainly smoking marijuana is got to be dangerous to your lungs if you think about what's going on. It's probably not as toxic as cigarettes, but it certainly is toxic. So you have to weigh that against it. And as to whether or not it will help you with neuropathic pain, I really have no opinion with respect to that. I think that you have to be very careful about that. And the jury is still out on that.
Well, I thank you for the clarity in that area, because there's a lot of misinformation out there where persons seem to recommend that for pain. So I think it's important what you said, at least coming from a learned mind like yourself. It will be enlightening to those listening in the public spaces. When we look at the issue of neuropathy, it is clear from what you're saying that one has to be more self-aware, and one has to treat with the condition very early, and there are nutrients out there that can assist. Clearly from your discussion, there are lifestyle changes that will contribute in a tremendous way, and then you have to also look at getting effective footwear, not, as you said, inexpensive shoes. It's so easy to go for what is cheap, and it causes more problems down the road. The drug that you suggested, new remedy, how often? What the intake is like? Is it that you can be on this drug indefinitely, meaning on a day-to-day basis? Walk us through the use and the intake of it.
Well, first off, although it does wonderful things to help the body, it's not a drug. It's a nutrient. It's a derivative of vitamin B1. It's a vitamin B1 that is very, very successfully absorbed from the body. And as a result, you get very high levels of vitamin B1 in your blood and your plasma. And it's very, very safe. This has been around since 1960. And I've been involved in it commercially for the last 18 years. And I don't get any calls from people talking about any complications associated with it. It's very, very safe. The business model I have in the US is I sell it to physicians who then sell it to their patients. So there are very, very many physicians who are my customers. And the way I generated that is I spoke at lectures. I lectured to physicians. I've lectured at over 100 seminars with physicians. And the ones who thought it was a good idea, they incorporated it into their practice. And I have a personal relationship with these people. And if there was any problem, I would get the call that day. If the patient came back and they said, since I started taking your stuff, this has happened, etc., I'd get the call that day because I have a personal relationship with these people, and I don't get the calls. If I did get the calls, I wouldn't sell this. And it's not just me, the literature, and I scour the literature all the time I'm a nerd. I love reading scientific papers, especially with respect to the nervous system and neuropathy, etc., and benfotiamine. There's just nothing out there. There's nothing significant out there at all. And the more we study this, the more remarkable it appears to be. So the regimen or the treatment protocol that I've developed is based on what's going on and why you became B1 deficient. So let's talk about diabetics. So diabetics urinate out, and this information is only about 15 years old. The study showed that people with diabetes, they urinate out their vitamin B1. They urinate out their B1 because their kidneys don't work properly, which is a well-known complication of diabetes. So they go into vitamin B1 deficiency over time. And as they go into B1 deficiency, they get the consequences of vitamin B1 deficiency, which is peripheral neuropathy for the purposes of our discussion here. So we want to restore your B1 levels as rapidly as possible. So we give you what's called a loading dose, and it's right on the label of the Neuremedy package. We give you a loading dose, which is 2 capsules twice a day for the first month. And generally, because vitamin B1 is stored in a certain manner, within a month's time, you restore vitamin B1 levels in people. So, and their symptoms show significant improvement in a month's time. That's one bottle. And after the first bottle, you've restored vitamin B1 levels. So now you don't have to restore them anymore. You just have to compensate for what the patient is losing in the urine. And also from an expense perspective, we drop down the expense. So initially it's one capsule twice a day. It's 2 capsules twice a day. And you do that for a month for the first bottle. And then you drop it to 2 capsules a day. That's all. And you continue taking it 2 capsules a day. And I'm often asked, well, how long do I have to stay on this? And the answer is that if you stop taking it, and I've seen this hundreds, if not thousands of times, if you stop taking it, your B1 levels will drop to low levels again, and your symptoms will come back. So you'll go ask the doctor, please give me more of these, or go to the store and get more of these because your symptoms have recurred. And you want to stay on it. So you don't have to stay on it, but you'll want to because its beneficial effects will subside if you go back into vitamin B1 deficiency. So without being as verbose as I just was, 2 capsules twice a day for the first month, and then 2 capsules a day thereafter.
That sounds pretty straightforward. You can't get any more detail than that.
You see how I made that question that could be answered in 5 seconds, a 2-minute dissertation? I apologize.
No need to apologize. Repetition is important. You've been shared a lot of information. I'm hoping that we can keep in touch beyond the minutes of this conversation, and maybe we can do another program with you moving forward. It's a lot of detail you've shared, and I have to thank you for the time that you've taken to share that with us. There are a lot of Trinidadians, and I'm sure your research would reflect that labor under conditions related to a diabetic condition. I have a relative who complains a lot about the nerve ending problems and the sensations and so on. So I'm going to apply what you're saying there. I'm going to find that nutrient.
Well, All Care Home Services is our distributor, and we're in a number of different pharmacies. And we'd be happy to help your relative out. I wish them the best of luck in it. And certainly, if you have any nerve dysfunction or peripheral neuropathy, et cetera, it's certainly worth a try. It's enormously safe, and you really have nothing to lose and only better health to gain.
Is there any advice you would have for someone who have family history of diabetes, who are not really in that position where they have suffered the nerve damage? Advice meaning, is there a way to preventative care to avoid getting to that point where neuropathy sets in?
Well, you can try your best to prevent it, but nothing guarantees that you won't get diabetes. There are plenty of people with peripheral neuropathy who have peripheral neuropathy for reasons we don't understand. It's called idiopathic neuropathy. But having said that, I would certainly go to the doctor on a regular basis every 6 months. I would check my blood sugars. There's a marker in the blood called hemoglobin A1C or glycohemoglobin, which tells you how you're doing with respect to controlling your blood sugars, how high they've been in the last 3 months. It's a very, very good marker that we've started using extensively. And you should have your physician measure that to see how you're trending. If your blood sugars are going up, I would decrease the amount of sugar I was intaking. I would decrease the amount of alcohol I was drinking. And I would be very aware. Neuropathy is insidious. It comes on you slowly. You don't know you have it. Why would you? And you just have less sensation than you had before. And that's a difficult thing to measure. Once you're completely numb, it's obvious. So when you have horrible pain, it's obvious. But a subtle change is difficult to measure. So you want to go to a physician. You want to make sure that your blood sugars are under control. You want to make sure that your blood pressure is under control. You want to take care of yourself, and you want to listen to medical advice to make sure that you're combating the ravages of aging and your genetics as best as possible.
Okay. Dr. Mann, thank you so much for your time and your warmth and your humor and the clearness with which you shared the information that you did.
Fareed, it was an honor and a privilege, really. And I'll come back anytime you'd like. Thank you so much for allowing me this privilege of talking to your audience.
Thank you. Enjoy your evening and be safe out there.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Fareed. Thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. Mann. And of course, your previous guest. It surely was absorbing to listen to the advice and the way you describe the functions of these different steps, those stages of diabetes. I think it was very relevant to the discussion today. Thank you so much, Fareed.
Thanks again, and I have to check out that drug for my relative. I didn't know, but I'm saying drug. I keep using the word drug, and it's a nutrient. I need to check that out.
A nutrient.
So many Canadians talk about that nerve problem.
Okay.
So to the listening public, we'll have another session on another day, discussing some of the consequential effects of diabetes and how we can treat with it. Because I know, like it's been said, 15% of the population suffer from it. So thank you again, David, and thank you for the listeners. Enjoy your evening and be safe on your way back home.
Okay, you too, my brother.
The future of talk is here. Power 102 Digital.
But that's it for today's edition of Hard Talk with host Fareed Ali. Come tomorrow, we'll have another segment of Hard Talk, and on Friday with the Fathers Association. Stay tuned to Power 102 Digital